and it said ARP in a secondhand store. So of course I had to go look it up. I'll leave it here if you want to take a look at it later. So I'll reread the story that I read last year, and after I read this story last year, Doreen came up to me and she said that the ARP had a personal association with herself and her family, and so I asked her to share this story with us this year, but I'll refresh our memories from last year. So the ARP is the Air Raid Patrol, or Air Raid Precautions. Some of you might have heard of that. And it was organized in the United Kingdom during World War II to protect civilians. The concept of Air Raid Patrol goes back to the closing years of World War II, with the development of bomber aircraft and the prospect that cities could be attacked from the air. Heavy curtains and shutters were required on homes and commercial buildings to prevent light escaping and making them a possible target for enemy bombers. ARP wardens ensured the blackout was observed, sounded air raid sirens, safely guided people to air raid shelters, distributed and checked gas masks, evacuated areas around unexploded bombs, rescued people from bomb-damaged areas, and provided temporary accommodation for those who had been bombed out. Often Boy Scouts under 18 would be their messengers to a control center. So this is a story that Doreen's going to continue with this morning, how it affected her family.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start by explaining where I come from. I was born and brought up in the city of Norwich, which is the capital city of Norfolk. And that is if you look at the map of England, it's the piece that juts out into the North Sea. The south was Suffolk, west was Cambridge, but east and north was the North Sea. Now, in September the 2nd, 1939, my father took my mother, my two brothers and myself to stay with my aunt in Lowestoft, which was in Suffolk. It was a nice seaside place. We were on the beach on the next day and got home. There was my father with the car. He bundled us in and said we must go home because they declared war. And not only Lowestoft, a seaside place, but it was a big fishing village and it was a big naval base. He tried to persuade my aunt, who we were staying with, to come with us, but she refused. She said, I've been here for 60 years, I'm not moving. However, when we got home, of course, as Susan explained, the sirens were practiced. There was one horrible thing, which if I hear it now gives me goosebumps, which was the warning that aircraft were approaching. Then there was the crash warning, which meant they were an imminent raid, and then the all clear. However, not much happened, and Norwich did receive several what they call hidden run raids, which was just a single aircraft. But in December the 2nd, 1940, was a Monday, and normally my mother helped my grandmother, her mother, Grandmother Freeman, with some of her washing. But it was a foggy day and she couldn't get it dry, and my task was after school to catch the bus and take it to Grandma. This day I couldn't go. Anyway, we always listened to Children's Hour, which was very nice. It started at 5 and finished at 5 to 6, and then there was the news. My brother and I were in the kitchen. We heard the siren go, so we went through and told Mum and Dad, and they said, oh, we're listening to the news, that'll be all right. We heard some thumps. There were 3. 1, 2, 3, right quick. And we went through and told Mum and Dad, and they said, oh. So Dad went outside, because we had blackouts then, you couldn't look out of the window. And he couldn't see any fires or anything, and he said, oh, that's all right, forget about it. Early in the morning, I could hear some noise downstairs. Me being of a nervous nature, always kept my bedroom door open, so I could hear this noise. So I came downstairs, and I couldn't believe what I saw. There was my grandfather Freeman nearly 6 foot tall and almost that round, standing crying, and my mother and father in tears too. Mother saw me and she said, "I hate to tell you this, but Granny, Auntie Bess, Auntie Rose and Uncle Billy and their neighbour have been killed in an air raid." Then Grandfather told us his story. He drove the London expresses, the steam engines. He got home at 5:30, and one of the passengers was Uncle Billy, who'd come home on leave from the RAF. And at the time, Rose and Billy were living with Grandmother. So Grandad said, "Well, I'll be home in an hour, you carry on home." He'd like to put what he said, the engine to bed. But of course, when he got home, there was a big hole in the road at the bottom of his street. And the pub on the corner, public house, or bar you call them here, was demolished. And the policeman was standing there. He said, "They managed to get these people out. They weren't seriously hurt." So Grandad said, "Oh." He started to walk up the street and he stopped him. He said, "You can't go up there." He said, "There's been bombs." So Grandad said, "Well, I live there." But of course, when he got there, there was nothing left of his house or the two houses either side. Two of the ladies, the one either side, had been seriously hurt, but it eventually turned out that my granny, my auntie, my Uncle Billy had all been killed together with the neighbour who'd gone round to try and warn them that the air raid was there. So that was very sad. Anyway, Grandad came to live with us, and because we only had 3 bedrooms, he was given the front room, which was what you would call our lounge, and he had his bed in there. April 1942, the siren went at night, and me being me, got up and said to everybody, "Come on, get up, the siren's going." So Father reluctantly got out of bed and looked out of the window, and it was like daylight. He said, "They're dropping flares. I believe this is a raid. You must get downstairs. Don't go to the shelter," which was out in the garden. He said, "Get under the stairs." Well, Mother had got the pantry under the stairs, and my 2 brothers and I, plus the dog, got right underneath. And Mum put her hand out to shut the door, and it wasn't there. And the next thing, everything came down on top of us. Luckily, my father had put his spare steel helmet. He was in the Home Guard, but he also had 2 sets of steel helmets and gas masks, and we never did know till after the war what he did. However, everything came down on top of us, and there was absolute silence for a little while. And then we could hear people running, and a voice said, "The house is on fire." Well, I've always been terrified of fire, and I started to scream. And my mother gave me such a smack, I stopped immediately. Anyway, eventually they got us out, and the front room where Grandad was in and the bedroom above was left, but there was nothing else left of the house. So we managed to get out through there, and they took us down to the shelter, the street shelter, which was about 30 yards away. Mum was badly bruised on her face, and both my brothers and I had cut feet because we had nothing on our feet. In the air raid shelter, of course, we met several of the neighbours, and one of the boys said, "It was my birthday today." He said, "I've left my stamp album behind." He wanted to go and get it, but of course he wasn't allowed out. But I take my hat off to the ARP. They were marvellous people. They rescued people together with the civil defence. And when the air raid was all over, we were taken to St Mary's Church Hall, where we were given tea and biscuits, and those of us who had no clothes were given blankets. My father then went to my grandmother's house, both his father and mother. They were with our ARP. Grandma had come home, Grandad was still out, and she lent us some shoes and coats so that we could walk to her house. We were then taken into the country, And I cannot remember the first week in the country. They say I was in shock. However, we were there for a month, staying in with some friends of Dad's. It was a 2 up and 2 down country cottage with the facilities right down the garden. Eventually they put a gun with the army, put a gun unit at the bottom of the garden, and we would have our breakfast in the morning, and then we would go down and the soldiers would give us another one. However, a month later, a friend of Dad's had moved her mother into the country, and we were able to hire her house, which was right on the outskirts of Norwich. I had a lovely big front garden and a huge back garden. And my mother immediately turned the back garden, or most of it, into a vegetable garden. Then she went to the cattle market, bought some chicks, and so eventually we had our own eggs. There were several raids after this, but they luckily didn't affect us. My little dog, as I said, and I forgot to tell you, we couldn't find my grandfather. And it turned out he'd gone into the kitchen before the bomb dropped, and he found himself upside down. And because we were so close to the explosion, we never heard it. We heard all the other explosions around us, but not that. And he eventually dug himself out, but he was in hospital for 3 months. He was quite badly hurt. We discovered afterwards that in the next street, a little girl who I used to escort to school before I went to senior school, her and her mother were also killed. So, and also in the First World War, my great uncle was killed, so that's why I wear 4 poppies. Anyway, towards the end of the war, we began to get doodlebugs. And they were strange things. We could hear them, and they would go chug, 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 chug. Why they called them doodlebugs, I don't know. I don't know how much damage they did in Norwich, I have no idea. And at the end of the war, we had a V2 rocket drop at the bottom of our lane, but it landed in a meadow, so it didn't do much damage. Unfortunately, a lot of the churches in Norwich were bombed, and they replaced a lot of them. One of them was St. Julian's. Now, they replaced that exactly as it was. And she was a Norwich saint, and I understand she was one of the first women to write a religious book. They didn't replace them all. There is one towards the outskirts of Norwich, near where the old city wall was. And it's just standing. It's a tall, round tower. It's a Saxon church. And they decided to leave that as it was. And it's still there today. We didn't find out what my father did until after the war. Apparently, when he was called up, because he was in the older bracket, and they always looked at the qualifications of what they had, they said he could either go in the RAF, his ground crew, or he could work for the civil defence. And so my father said, well, if I work for the Ministry of Defence, does it mean I can stay home? And they said, yes, you may have to go away for a day or two, but... So that was why he was home. And what he'd done, he put gun emplacements. He was in charge of putting gun emplacements all around the coast, Norfolk and North Suffolk. And he was in Lowestoft when it was badly bombed. And he also went to Coventry after that was bombed. He said it was terrible. But he never actually told us what he did because he was sworn to secrecy what he did. And also, I must just say, in Norwich there's a place called Chapelfield Gardens. Now, in the 1500s, that was an archery practice place. And they made it into a park. Well, they decided they would have manoeuvres there, or practice there. There was the police from Norfolk and Suffolk, Norfolk and Norwich, the firemen, the civil defence, the Home Guard, all the people who were helping, they practiced what to do and how to do it. St. John's Ambulance was there, and the Red Cross. And my father was watching this young man. He was dressed in police uniform, and he looked at the number on his shoulder, and he said, well, that's neither Norwich nor Norfolk. So he reported him to his commander, and they apprehended him, and he turned out to be a German spy. So my father got a certificate of merit for that. There was something else I was going to say, and I can't remember what it was. Never mind, I think I've spoken long enough, but I will tell you this. After the war, a charity was formed called Chatterbox, the talking newspaper for the blind, and some friends of mine helped to run this. They would take various pieces from the paper and put them on tape, and they also had people talking. Well, this lady, her name was Marion Lake, and she'd come back to Norwich and was a guide for Norwich City. And they asked her to give some talks, and her talk was called Norwich from 1066 to 81. And she concluded it by saying, when I was coming back to Norwich, my friend said to me, you'll never recognise the place, it's been bombed. Well, she said, I came home and I stood on the steps of the town hall, which was completed in 1938. It's a very modern building. It looks strange in the middle of a medieval city. However, and I turned and looked, and she said the marketplace was still there, the ancient Guildhall was still there, St. Peter Mancroft Church was still there. I looked up and there was the castle on its mound, and then I looked and there was the spire of the cathedral still standing. The only thing missing was the thatched tea rooms where she used to go and have tea with her friends, and there's now a big modern store there. And next to St. Michael's Church was the little old thatched house, which used to be a pub called the Barking Dickey. And she said, it's still a fine old city. Now, I brought some books for you to look at. My junior school was bombed, but the senior school wasn't.